Since February 2022, somewhere between 500,000 and over a million people have left Russia, depending on the estimate. In terms of speed and concentration, this is the biggest exodus of young people since the 1970 revolution. To be fair, the wave in the 90s after the Soviet collapse was actually bigger in total numbers, around 2 million people, but that was spread out over an entire decade. This time, a comparable number left in just a couple of years. These aren't refugees in the usual sense. They're mostly young, educated, well-off people, programmers, scientists, entrepreneurs, exactly the kind of people any country needs the most. In this video, we will break down where they actually went, what they built there, and why even the Kremlin itself can convince them to come back. And I will tell you about something that makes this topic especially relevant right now. My name is Anastasia, I'm a 19-year-old entrepreneur and I run this channel about history and politics. Don't forget to subscribe and hit like. The profile of the typical person who left is remarkably consistent across independent surveys. About 80% have a university degree, well above the national average. Most are between 20 and 40 years old. The main fields are IT, science, business, analytics, and culture. The first wave started right after the war began in February 2022, and the biggest wave came in September of that same year when Putin announced a partial mobilization and young men of draft age rushed for the border overnight. Kazakhstan took in most, around 146,000 people. Next was Armenia, where I'm based right now, around 110,000. Then Turkey, Israel, Georgia and Serbia together taking in over 200,000 more. What about Europe? Germany also made the top list of destinations, around 36,000 people, and historically it's been a favorite Western destination for educated Russians for years, even before the full-scale war. The inflow into Russia's neighboring countries was dense enough to physically reshape some of their economies within months. Georgia is now home to 108,000 people from Russia, Ukraine and Belarus combined, which is already 2.6% of the country's entire population. In Armenia, the wave sent rental prices up several times over in a single year. By 2025, the market cooled off somewhat, with prices pulling back about a third from their peak. Here is a concrete example of what happens when that talent leaves and finds a new home. Former top executives from the Russian bank Tinkoff founded a fintech startup in Mexico called Plata. By 2026, the company hit a valuation of $5 billion, becoming the most valuable private fintech in all of Latin America, and secured a full banking license in Mexico. Of the company's 2,000 employees, 700 are Russian, but according to the founder himself, almost none of them still hold a Russian passport. It's not an isolated case. Yandex founder Arkady Volosh, after leaving Russia, built a company called Neighbors Group in the Netherlands, which signed a multi-billion-dollar deal with Microsoft. But it's important to be honest here, immigration isn't a success story for everyone. For most people who left, it means years of uncertainty, a language barrier, losing your entire social circle, struggling with visas and bank accounts, and being separated from family who stayed behind in Russia. Stories like Plata are the exception at the very top, not the typical experience of the ordinary IT worker just trying to rent an apartment and find a job in an unfamiliar country. If you have watched this far, you probably like my content. You can support it in dollars, euros, or even rubles, any currency via the link in the description. And by the way, I also build websites, apps, and startups, so if you have a business you want to improve online, that link is in the description too. Now, let's continue. The independent research project Outrush survived over 8,500 people who left and found that fewer than 10% had returned to Russia. Most reported that their financial and emotional well-being had actually improved over time abroad. The Kremlin itself acknowledged the scale of the problem, and here is an interesting detail. Russia has had a separate state program running for almost 20 years now, meant to attract ethnic Russians and Russian speakers from former Soviet republics back into the country. This has nothing to do with people who left especially because of the war. It's a broader attempt to lure compatriots back in general. Even that program hit a record low in 2025, the lowest result in its entire history, with only 27,500 people relocating to Russia throughout it for the whole year. And the flow of people wanting to move to Russia specifically from the neighboring countries where most of the post-2022 immigrants actually live has collapsed compared to before the war, down fivefold from Georgia, fourfold from Armenia, threefold from Kazakhstan. If even an older program that has nothing to do with the war can't attract people anymore, that says a lot about how unappealing Russia looks right now, period. On February 1st, 2024, a law took effect in Russia allowing the state to confiscate the property of citizens who publicly criticize the war, which only makes anyone who left even less inclined to ever come back. In one of my recent videos, I talked about the State Duma elections happening this September, and here is what matters. According to several independent outlets, including Meduza, Nova Gazeta Europe, and iStories, citing sources inside the presidential administration and security services, right after those elections, likely around October, the Kremlin may announce a new wave of mobilization. Ukrainian President Zelensky estimates the possible scale of somewhere between 300,000 and 500,000 people. The reason is simple. Voluntary contract recruitment has fallen sharply. According to Germany's Institute for International Security Affairs, in the first quarter of 2026, Russia was signing an average of just 800 contracts a day, the lowest figure in 3 years. Western analysts point out directly that one of the biggest risks of a new mobilization is exactly this, another mass wave of migration, a repeat of September 2022, just in a country that's now far more exhausted and impoverished than it was back then. The immigration problem is stacking on top of an already serious demographic crisis inside the country itself. According to Eurostat, 1,265,000 children were born in Russia in 2023, and that number dropped to 1,222,000 in 2024, with forecasts pointing to further decline. Meanwhile, deaths outnumber births in the country by roughly 500,000 people every year. So the country is losing population from two directions at once, fewer children being born than people dying, and a large share of its most productive, educated, and young citizens living voluntarily with no plans to come back. A country can bounce back from an economic downturn. It can survive sanctions, but it's extremely hard to replace an entire generation of educated, ambitious young people who left once and decided there is no route back, especially if another wave, just like it, might be right around the corner. Let me know what you think in the comments and drop your ideas for what I should cover next.